Discovery of native graves renews probe of U.S. Christian boarding schools. Recent discoveries of hundreds of unmarked graves of native children in Canada, in Canadian church-operated schools, alarmed the United States. A new wave of investigations into similar boarding schools in America has begun. In the U.S., Alaskan Native and Indigenous children were routinely separated from their families, including their tribal customs and languages. Students were frequently deprived of adequate food and medical care to the point that many perished. The students' parents were often not informed of their deaths until they had already been buried in the school cemeteries in unmarked graves. Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior, was compelled to write about her family's experience in the United States after hearing about the remains of 215 Indigenous children found in Canada. Haaland is also the first Native American to serve the United States as a cabinet secretary. Samuel Torres, director of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, a private group formed to focus attention on the traumas caused by the institution of residential schools, stated that the church apologies are a good start. However, quote, there is a lot more to be done.
Yeah, they need to pay a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, obviously, that's not even enough. They need to be paid, the entire, if it was up to me, they would be raided by Italian army, and then all their assets would be seized and sold.
Oh, you're talking about the Catholic Church.
Well, any church, actually.
Because a lot of these residential schools were run by Catholic institutions as well as Protestant institutions. It wasn't exclusively Catholic. But in Canada, I know that the majority of them were, I think.
Well, do they have money?
Catholic.
As long as they have money, they need to be sued. The problem, I don't know if this is true, but I think the problem with a lot of these churches is that, they're disconnected entities from each other. So if one of them does something wrong, you can't just sue the entire thing, the entire it was this entity, not that entity. Is there a way to legally just hold the entire institution responsible? No, right? Legally,
we would need to talk to an attorney about that. That is way above my expertise. But yeah, that is a huge problem because a lot of these institutions are still active in one form or another. There are some institutions that used to be residential schools, which are now no longer, for the purpose of assimilating Native children into the white man's way, or to Americanize them, or to make them Canadian, in quotations. But they still exist as, state-run schools in some capacity. Those still exist. A lot of the churches that were responsible for running these programs, when they were explicitly to make a man out of the savage, was the mentality. They are still in existence, and they still have people running them. And a lot of these churches who were involved with this have started to make apologies, but it's simply not enough. I wanted to play a quick video from the Secretary of the Interior. I'm sorry, what's her full name? Deb Haaland, because I thought it was really powerful. So I just want to play a short clip. Okay, let's add this here. Let me know if I don't have audio.
But now, for the first time, this country has a cabinet secretary who is Indigenous. I come from ancestors who endured the horrors of Indian boarding school assimilation policies carried out by the same department that I now lead. For more than a century, the Interior Department was responsible for operating the Indian boarding schools across the United States and its territories. We are therefore uniquely positioned to assist in the effort to recover the dark history of these institutions that have haunted our families for too long. It's our responsibility.
You're muted.
Sorry, I thought that was just a really kind of powerful thing to highlight, that the very branch of the government that was in charge of cultural genocide, is now headed by an Indigenous woman, and she is fully, opening the doors of their historical records and archives to archaeologists and historians and various commissions that are either governmental or outside of the government to really dig into this dark history that is part of the Native American continent. It's kind of a really full circle moment to have someone who's, direct family experience this, now in charge of the institution that brutalized them, and her desire and willingness and eagerness to cooperate with more people being educated on the subject, as well as, beginning the process of holding our country and the various other religious and state groups that were involved in these really brutal policies, like bringing them to account, I think is, I found it to be very, very powerful.
How did they all die? This is like so many. I don't even understand. How did they manage to, did they just not feed them?
I mean, a lot of it comes down to like neglect, medical negligence. There's also an argument to be made that the stripping of that familial connection. I mean, there's so much science behind what it does to children physically. It changes your brain chemistry. It changes like so many somatic responses. So the mere fact that they were separated from their caregivers, itself, I would reckon, contributed to greater health risks.
Yeah, but it's not enough, obviously, to.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of times, these children would go missing, and parents years later, because oftentimes they weren't even around, they didn't know where they were for possibly many years. They would go inquire about what their children were, where they were, and these institutions would just say they ran away. And they died of exposure. They died in the cold or something, kind of trying to cover up what they went through. The fact that there are school cemeteries is so shocking and concerning,
Yeah, but there is okay, so the number here that I'm saying is 3,200 children. Okay, so this is
between what time period?
Okay, so approximately 150,000 Native children attended these schools for more than a century. Sadly, the National Truth, whatever commission in Canada determined 3,201 Native children died due to unsatisfactory conditions, malnutrition, and abuse. Mm-hmm. But how bad can, it must have been horrible to get 3,200. Really, I mean, for the unsatisfactory conditions is doesn't even begin to describe how bad things could have been for you to get 3,200 children dying. So yeah, it's here. The explanation
and
is
it's
what I
likely
mentioned.
A lot more
malnourishment. So it means that they just didn't feed them. So that's how bad they were at taking care of children. You couldn't do the simple thing of feeding them, and
or
abuse.
Not feeding them enough of a holistic diet. Yeah,
what kind of abuse they must have gone through for them to die. You know what I mean? I have seen children in the poorest parts of the planet, with under abusive conditions, and they have a very, very bad time, but they don't die. So for these kids to die at this high numbers, that means that it was. I can't even picture how horrible it must have been for this many of them to die.
Mm-hmm. For decades, some people it was allowed to continue. It was allowed to continue like this. That's how the number gets so large, and it's likely an underestimate.
Yeah,
because some people, it's cultural genocide. They didn't care. Well, it's also literal genocide. They don't.
No, but I don't think it's like I don't think like people are coming up with conspiracy theories that are saying like it was on purpose, right? Like they were actually trying. I don't know if that's unless there's evidence for that. It's
Maybe in
irresponsible.
individual institutions, I don't think it was a explicit conspiracy, but the
Yeah,
result.
but I think like the people who are suggesting that are being irresponsible unless they have evidence for it, because it takes away from the case that we actually have, right? Like you don't need to suggest things that we don't have evidence for. This is already very bad, and you're making it by coming up with conspiracies. You are actually delegitimizing the strong case that we already have here, right?
Yeah, you don't need to exaggerate it when it's already so severe.
Yeah. So please don't do that. But yeah, this is like, yeah, but when it says an abuse, like that must have been some really crazy abuse for the kids to actually for it to result in kids dying at such high numbers.
Well, I mean, these schools and institutions were set up with the explicit intention of literally like whitewashing, Native and Indigenous children, and so they would be severely punished for displaying any outward signs of their original culture, speaking their own language. You strip someone of their cultural identity to the point that they decide to, you do it in a way that this is part of thought reform, where the process becomes initiated from the person themselves. And the only way that you're able to begin a level of thought reform that is that deep is by controlling the minutia of someone's environment and having severe penalties, psychological and physical, for not undertaking the thought reform internally on the inside. Yeah.
By the way,
what I wanted to say is the reason why we clapped for this news is because I'm very happy that we're having this moment of reckoning. I think it's very important that we really bring everything about this to light. It's extremely painful and it's shocking. But the positive about this is that we are undergoing this process of self-reflection and accountability. And just apologies and words, it's not enough. I don't know, how far this can go or to what extent people will be held or institutions will be held accountable and in which way legally this will go, but the kind of moral reckoning of the country's consciousness is something I will applaud.
Yeah, I also want to use this as an opportunity to mention to people, for the people in Canada, the conservatives in Canada some of them might be worried about creeping Sharia, but are not consistently also worried about Christianity,
creeping Christianity.
Well, I mean, it's already there.
Yeah.
I just want to remind them that Christianity has taken the lives of more Canadians than Sharia has ever, right? You have 3,201 Canadian children that were taken out because of Christianity. Okay, so if you are like worried about Sharia in Canada and not worried about Christianity in Canada, then you're being completely inconsistent, because that has been a much greater harm to your country and to your people than Islam has ever. Anyways.
Very true. I think a portion of this initiative, I'm not completely positive, is going to be a lot of funds dedicated to language revitalization, which is awesome because people underestimate how much language is inherently a carrier of cultural identity. So I think that's a cool initiative. Hey guys, if you're a fan of Blasphemy and Sexy Callie, like me, then you need to be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, link in the description below. because if you subscribe, we will send you a free copy of our Blasphemous Art ebook. And let me tell you, it is the tastiest blasphemy that you can find anywhere available today. And we are so generous with our blasphemy that we continue to send you more blasphemy every week. So make sure to subscribe. Link in the description below.